Hello students, Professor Kevin Taylor here, calling you from the bunker. As a former 3D environmental artist for Rebellion, working for publishers such as Sega and Bethesda Softworks, I wanted to take some time to discuss some of the important creative considerations that will guide your technical environmental development, namely the creation of environmental narrative within your scenes. So let's begin. Working as an artist means being a storyteller, and this is certainly the case with environments. Many expect that the game design document provided will outline every aspect an artist will need, but that just is not the case. With increasingly expansive environments, designers are drawn more towards the major elements of the title, seeing the artist expected to tell more stories within the virtual worlds. Now, before we get into the 3D aspects of this, we're going to spend a few minutes discussing traditional narrative practice for world development, and how even the most bizarre, alien-ridden narratives are actually all related to very human stories. Following this, we're going to push on to considerations for 3D space, before finishing on the direction current practice suggests for the future of environmental narrative. Stories are an expression of our innermost selves, our desires and fears made manifest through narrative trials that see the protagonist endure and grow. The narrative bar for video games has moved to match that of cinema, and so too must the creatives in the field evolve, mastering linear principles in order to incorporate interactive methods for user engagement. While a good story and engaging characters will draw our investment in narrative outcomes, the dream of being part of a story, of standing with the characters we love and hate, is brought into clear focus through interactivity. The process of designing a compelling interactive narrative is based on a foundation of solid traditional principle. The development of archetypes, the 12 steps of the hero's journey, and the 3-act structure can lead to a compelling experience of humanity as heroes and heroines are drawn from their lives into tragedy and turmoil, only to overcome their fears and rise triumphant, most of the time. You may hear me say this a few times, but the core of storytelling is always human stories. Traditional principles will never diminish, with the monomyth core story of the human condition remaining the same now as it was 1,000 years ago. Stories will continue to delve into our deepest fears, exploring the depths of our insecurities as we struggle in our daily lives to overcome the obstacles that we face. This concept remains the same whether it involves cavemen, robots, or aliens. There are various approaches to developing an expansive narrative. Practices such as Tolkien's bottom-up technique, where the author develops a deeply realistic world with layers of society, culture, and geography to determine the historic progress of an entire world, complete with their cultural evolutions that define the unique idiosyncrasies and colloquialisms that lead to the subtle narrative gold of his worlds. Or the top-down technique that sees surface layers developed as per the path of the narrative, creating the illusion of depth by delving deeper into the story world only as per the viewer's path. Non-linear interactive worlds, in which the user determines the progression of their character or those within the world, require in-depth understanding of these practices. The lack of linearity acting not as a means of covering the underdeveloped story, but to create many lines of functional, linear paths of narrative that maintain their consistency whatever direction the story flows. This process requires a strong understanding of the world, its characters, and clearly defined goals of each, utilizing the different states of decisions from contained to branching, accumulative, and other to allow a mapping of these paths to formulate the illusion of true choice within the tight confines of design. In this way, the player is drawn into the story, their investment deepening as they progress into the illusion, and the weight of their decisions growing through narrative dilemmas. While these experiences are unique to each title, the fundamental aspects of production are ever present, creating the illusion of immersion and involvement to elicit the emotional investment of the user, all within a manageable production timeline. How do these traditional narrative principles connect to environmental development, I hear you ask? A strong environmental design should possess what's known as an environmental narrative, which can utilize said principles to achieve its goal. There are some standard questions that I've identified in order to help you define the tale of your space. First, why was the space built? How was the space used and maintained? Who has lived in or occupied this space? And how did they live within the space? For an environmental artist, answers to these questions will provide a wealth of information that will be utilized within the construction. These questions can be loosely applied to any environment, but buildings and other man-made structures are right on the nose. Let's take a look at the images on screen. If you look at the image on the left, you'll notice that it's devoid of life. There is no real story here beyond the fact that the person living here is likely a serial killer, or maybe this is just a show house. You decide. The image on the right is a hellscape that some of you might be familiar with, Parenthood. It tells a pretty clear story of the individuals that live here and the challenges that they face. To create 3D spaces with a sense of fidelity and life, you must be a student of the world itself. You must understand how nature and structures work, as this will inform your creative and technical goals and processes. As an example, let's take a trip into your imagination. Close your eyes. We're going somewhere new. If you were to construct a hallway within your mind, imagine the floor is tiled. The wallpaper is intricate and interesting, and there is an ornate window at the end of the hall through which light cascades across the tiles and reflects up the baseboards of the wall. These few examples take you to a place without much character, and certainly without any kind of stress. Or maybe that's just the timbre of my voice. But let's ask some of the questions that we looked at previously, and see if the hall looks any different. Why was the space built? Let's say it was constructed as a psychiatric hospital. How was the space used and maintained? It was used for torturous treatments, and was abandoned 50 years ago. Who has lived in or occupied this space? Well, initially the patients and staff, but now wild animals, and maybe a few remnants of the former residents. How did they live within this space? Once they lived quite poorly, but when the facility was abandoned, the space was left to the elements, and it has grown wild as a result. These questions and answers give us a great platform on which to view this space, and I hope by this point you can safely draw your imagination away from that place, and that a part of you doesn't live there forever. With research always the first step, we dive into some abandoned space imagery to see how nature reclaims spaces that it was once kept from. Additional questions such as knowing the geographical location will give us a greater understanding of the elements that have attacked the structure, Nevada being very different from, let's say, England. In England, the incessant drizzle, wind and moisture has brought puddles into the space through the broken window at the end of the hall. This would lead to moss and plant life, which would in turn lead to bugs and animals. The walls would grow mouldy, the floor dirty and wet. As an artist, you need to be able to feel the space that you are creating, to smell the dampness in the air, and understand how all of these aspects will inform your work. The moisture and dampness, for example, would not exist in a vacuum, and you can't have this wet floor with mucky moss next to a tidy wall that doesn't support this tale. We strive for unity and fidelity within all of our environmental constructions. You should also consider the tone that you're trying to achieve. In my 117 class, we will have spent time discussing the use of lighting to enhance or contrast a tone or atmosphere. The goal of everything that we do within an environment is to speak to the audience with your work. Provide them the ingredients to encourage how you want them to feel. To do this, you have to know what they should be feeling to guide your work in that direction. Maybe this all seems a little new to yourself and you're worried about your ability to apply these concepts to your scene, when in fact we make design decisions every day that create a visual narrative. Let's say I walked into your house and then into your room. That would be a shock, I know, but once we got over that shock, I would be able to see a tapestry of character laid out before me. Is the room messy or tidy? By messy, are there clothes on the floor? Are the clothes dirty or clean? Are there cans of Monster and empty Cheeto packets stuffed into a pizza box? Do you have posters, pictures? What are they of? Family, friends, films, bands? Do you have a laptop, a PC, supplies for drawing, books? What are these books? Have you been scrolling on the wall like a madman? All of these points would tell me a lot of things about who you are, your interests, priorities, passions and pet peeves. As an environmental artist, you have to be able to create people to occupy the spaces that you develop, because people inform the spaces that they occupy. No space exists within a vacuum. Understanding character development practices and storytelling will help you to achieve that goal in the development of your virtual people. Oh, and if your room looks anything like the first picture, I encourage you to take a gap year and sort your life out before I have an anxiety attack at the thought of your space. Micro-stories refer to the specific goal of telling a tale within a space, or spread across multiple scenes, and are about people who have lived, loved, and existed within the world. They can be conveyed more directly in logs, journals, or recordings, but as a species we are attuned to respond to the tales we see before us, consciously and subconsciously. Micro-stories can be the population of a space to tell the story of a character, just as is the case with your messy bedroom and the horrors it contains. or it can be of a journey or events that befell a character. We as environmental artists can provide the answers, or can scatter the story around and allow the viewer to draw their own conclusions. This is also a natural occurrence, and oftentimes suggesting without telling directly will allow the user to feel more immersed within a scene due to the mind's practice of reading and drawing conclusions all of its own, which can be very satisfying. Designers decide on the fundamental aspects of play throughout their games, creating a timeline of pacing to form emotional journeys throughout their experience. As an artist, it would be your duty to create the visuals that carry these emotions of play. In a survival game, if a character is set to feel fearful and on edge, then they are deprived of resources and put in a situation where danger feels imminent. This high anxiety state must be relieved in order to be experienced again anew, so providing resources or a safe room can deliver respite, only to allow it to be stolen anew in future encounters. As an artist, you must be fluent in both the language of emotion and how to achieve it through visual means, allowing visual emotion to be wielded like a scalpel rather than a lump hammer. As the environmental artist, you are the architect of these experiences, so dig deep, understand your range of emotions and how they work, and write the tale of an environment that will have the audience a puppet on the visuals of your emotional strings. Environmental artists remain the most sought after on the 3D job boards. A high quality environment is created by a proficient digital storyteller. The ability to achieve a high standard of visual storytelling will absolutely be the cherry on the cake of your technical ability. I realise that my goal in this class is managerial, but there is a lot of general content that I like to cover over the course of a live class that I'm not going to have the opportunity to do in an online classroom of this type, and this is one of the points that I felt was well worth covering. If you have any questions about environmental narrative or 3D considerations, then I encourage you to put it in the Discord virtual classroom. In this way we can keep discussions open and make it an active learning opportunity for the entire class. I'm a big fan of all of this stuff, and I'm more than happy to provide information based on my passion and experience in the field to support your development. Good luck with your work, and happy modelling!